it is very good for the West to lay down the law with Iran, to not even enter negotiations that they would allow to have be prolonged the way that they were under Barack Obama, but basically to tell Iran it has to end its nuclear program or it will face consequences. I believe the talks should be about the terms of surrender. The world cannot tolerate an Islamic theocracy in Iran of a jihadist bent who has shown its inclination to sow instability and mayhem and violence all over the region, acquiring nuclear weapons. So it's very good that the Trump administration uses this moment when Iran is weak both internally and in the region, with its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, having been weakened, to try to impose terms.
There's so many problems that right now directly impact not just the United States, but the globe. The United States will not go it alone. I think the question is who's going to be involved, who's going to be drawn in, how far is this going to spread? And the real issue to look at, too, is the United States bases. Because what was Khomeini's comment? He said that we will attack U.S. bases. I
think the U.S. can survive an attack on its bases. If Iran really wants a war, it will get a real war. That regime is weak. It is very unpopular. Probably some of the happiest people in the world about the saber rattling by Trump are the Iranian people who are waiting to be freed. The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that Trump walked away from his first term, I was not a fan of walking away from that. Mm-hmm. But what was that really? That was a deal with the Iranian regime that we will not mess with you in exchange for you ending your nuclear program. It basically sold out the Iranian people. But the Israelis could live without a nuclear threat from Iran. When Trump walked away from that, he had no plan B for preventing Iran from then resuming its enrichment, which they did. I believe that was a terrible, horrible a mistake in judgment and certainly in execution. And much of the Israeli security establishment agreed with me. I would hope for better judgment now. I don't think you can really negotiate too much with this Iranian regime. Their activity in the region has been nothing short of an outrage. They oppress their own people, and they are a menace to the region and the world. I think there are real possibilities for setting back their nuclear program in such a way that it would also weaken their regime, but that would involve the most powerful bunker-busting bombs directed at Natanz and Fordo enrichment plants, and at the Iraq heavy water facility. That would be tremendously embarrassing for Iran. And the U.S. can do that, Israel much less so. There's no reason to involve Israel and confuse the narrative and create Muslim agitation against Israel. I think with the Houthis, Israel supplied intelligence. That maybe, but I would want Israel to stay away.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, let's say that Trump does carry through with these bunker busters and does do some real damage. Iran, in its embarrassment, is likely going to have some retaliation or counterattack. Does that then involve Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, etc., and is that targeted at Israel?
Hamas is in no particular position to do significant damage to Israel today. Hezbollah has been thrashed in Lebanon. Lebanon does not want any further involvement as an ally of Iran, and they have right now some potential for actually taking control of their own country again. As for the Houthis, they are a ragtag militia. I'm not suggesting that they're easy to demolish because they don't care about damage to their own country. The Houthis have caused the deaths of about 400,000 people in Yemen, and they don't seem to care. So that is a legitimate problem. But do I think that the mightiest military on earth can't take care of them? I have to hope that, yes, it can. I don't think the Houthis can defeat the U.S. They can certainly impede maritime trade through the Red Sea and onward to the Suez Canal. That they have been allowed to do this more or less by the West and by the Biden administration in particular for a year or more has bewildered me. And again, I'm not a big fan of what Trump is doing domestically or with Ukraine or with Europe or in general. But with the Middle East, these are pretty good moves. The Houthis need to be schooled. The Iranians really need to be stopped in their march towards a nuclear weapon. And if at all possible, the Iranian people should be encouraged to find a way to overthrow them.
So I want to turn back to you, Felice, and actually piggyback on the Houthis here. How much of a regional threat do you think the Houthis really are? I mean, obviously, as Dan alluded, they've been impacting the maritime trade. That goes without question. But lately, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of rockets being targeted toward Israel, obviously intervened before they hit the country. But the sirens, the trauma, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. I mean, do you see this as something that's going to grow before it gets less, even with U.S. action?
It's a good question, Mayan. Why don't we just look at it? If one rocket actually wasn't intercepted and there was a lot of collateral damage in Israel, what would happen? And that hasn't happened, but it can. And the fact is, and it remains, that the Houthis have developed their own drones. They are getting intel and information, not just intelligence, but training by the Iranians. Maybe they're giving them the money and the wherewithal, and I understand where Trump is trying to come in. The president is trying to say, I've got to stop the money, I've got to stop the funding, but they're giving them the know-how how to do this. The Houthis control Yemen, and that is the reality right now.
Half of Yemen.
But it doesn't seem like it's half of Yemen at the moment.
It's still big, even half is a big country.
But nobody can fight back. What is the first stop that President Trump is going to be doing in the Middle East now? It's Saudi Arabia. We need to understand what's going to happen in that visit. And believe me, it's connected to the Houthis as well.
Well, look, but the Saudis tried to fight the Houthis for 7 years with U.S. backing and with Egyptian backing and UAE active involvement, and they basically failed to dislodge them because they weren't prepared to do that much damage to the Yemeni people, and they weren't prepared to invade. So under that strategy, they failed to dislodge the Houthis from Sana'a and from the port of Hodeidah, which is the port they're using.
Though, at this stage? Do you think that the reality on the ground might look different? One of
the weaknesses, the weakness of the Iran nuclear deal was not, I believe, that Iran was not honoring it. The Mossad and the IAEA, the UN nuclear agency, says they were. The weakness was that it projected to Iran that it's okay for you not to just oppress your own people, but to spread mayhem through proxies around the Middle East. It wasn't a great deal, but it did stop the nukes. Now, that was the deal. I wouldn't reprise that exact deal. At this point, there is a risky idea on the table of actually attacking Iran, of tolerating their wrath and their retaliation. It won't be pleasant. Felice is right. A missile could get past the air defenses in Israel and cause tremendous damage. It could further harm maritime trade for however long it lasts. There could be attacks on U.S. bases. But there are times in history where you have to have a war. And I'm not suggesting we should rush into war with Iran. I'm not indifferent about the dangers of that happening. I do think if it did, it would be short-lived and should be short-lived. It should be decisive. But on the other hand, I am saying if they refuse a reasonable offer to talk terms of surrender, then it's something worth considering.
So I want to move to Qatari, but I want you to respond real fast. What do you want?
The question really is are you really getting to all nuclear facilities? Maybe you're hitting one nuclear facility and it stops just part of the problem. And it is an issue. I mean, again, we're always looking at what does that mean, right? How much intel do we really have that we're being fed as the public, even as journalists?
That's where Israel comes in, by the way.
But I mean, I think the question is, and Israel is
I think they're pretty well infiltrated. And if they really destroy the 3 facilities I mentioned,
3 major facilities,
and a few others, that sets them back by months, if not years. But there's the bigger issue, the message to Iran that your octopus of disruption with the nukes, with the proxies, with the oppression of your own people, with the terrorism around the world, all of that has to end. I'm not suggesting we should engineer regime change in Iran.
No, the people have to engineer that with our support.
Knowing quite a few people in the Iranian opposition and talking to them all the time, I have some confidence that if a true armed conflict emerged, and if Iran tried to retaliate, and to really engage in war with the West, and doubtless they'd also try to draw in Israel, which is why I say Israel should be careful and stay out of it as much as possible, then that war could be brutal and short-lived and inspire a revolution in Iran. I would expect.
But that was actually my next point, because really the people have been ready for this for years, and I've interviewed into Iran, and there were points when sanctions were working, and really that would have helped to really ignite this. So maybe it's a decade later, and it might happen anyhow. The real issue.
You hear from so many people in Iran that they're happy about the sanctions because they're hoping the regime would be weakened. Now, the sanctions hurt the people. Right. Consider how hated a regime must be for that to be not a fringe voice, but what sounds like more or less a consensus.
And they are looking for this. This is the moment they were waiting for, or even people within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard willing and ready and able to do so. Yeah. They always felt they were not getting the assistance they needed and that the world wasn't listening clearly. My bigger question here, too, is that if you see that there's an attack on the Iranian facilities in Iran, what happens that if you don't take out the Houthis facilities at the same time, you have a big problem on your hands because they're still holding the Red Sea. And again, the Red Sea can't be left in the state that it's in. It really is a major problem in terms of shipping companies that have just stopped and ceased. Yeah. And you can have somebody controlling the waterways that deal with Asia and Europe and getting oil and gas transferred?
I think what may be necessary is an invasion of the port of Hodeidah, which is the narrowest point of the entrance to the Red Sea. That's the port they use for this. But of course, Felice is right. They fire projectiles from further away, from mobile handheld launchers. They fire drones, not necessarily from the port itself. They're going to be difficult to deal with. I would imagine if the U.S. crosses the Rubicon and actually attacks Iran, they will have a plan for also attacking the civilian, the administrative infrastructure of the regime, and for silencing the Houthis.